Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's best books. I'm your host, Eric Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 52 books per year and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each book. Today I'm going to cover Antifragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. This is book 27 of 52 for my 2020 reading list. Now I know it's called Antifragile, but I like to have a little fun there with Antifragile in that reference to the classic Christmas movie, The Christmas Story. In this scene...
Fragile! It must be Italian.
Well, I think that says fragile, honey.
Oh, yeah.
That clip is actually an excellent lead-in into discussing anti-fragility. So what is it? Well, Taleb himself starts off chapter 1 at the post office, where he says, we often see that word fragile on packages. And so what does it mean? Well, it means that whatever's inside that package can easily be broken. There are fragile contents inside. And the words that we often see with fragile are handle with care. So what is the opposite of fragile? Well, what do you think it is? Maybe something strong or robust or resilient, right? That's what most people say when they're asked the question, what do you think is the opposite of fragile? But Taleb says, no, that's not actually the opposite. If fragile means volatility in the sense of, let's say the package is on a cart and the package falls off the cart. Well, if it does that, it could break. So let's call falling off the cart volatility. If fragile means volatility can break it, then the opposite would be that volatility would improve it. So if the package falls off the cart, it would actually improve it. So if something is strong, it's just in a neutral state. Like if whatever's inside the package is strong and you drop it, nothing's going to happen to it. It's strong. It's not going to break. So it's neutral. But anti-fragile, something that's the opposite of fragile, would benefit from falling, would benefit from that volatility. So why is this important? Well, first off, we live in a volatile world, and we as people are not fragile. We are actually anti-fragile. One way we can look at this is with muscles. So if we tear our muscles by lifting heavy weights, they will grow back stronger. But if we were fragile, we would tear those muscles and they would just remain torn. They would stay broken. So to treat one as anti-fragile is actually to get the best out of them and to prepare them for what Taleb calls black swan events. But not by predicting those events, but by becoming the kind of person who can weather those events. But it doesn't just stop there. Systems can be anti-fragile as well. And so that's what a lot of this book gets into, is just fragility as people compared to anti-fragility, but then also fragility of systems compared to anti-fragility of systems. Taleb points out that we don't have a term for the opposite of fragile, so he makes it up, and that's what he calls anti-fragile. And he points out that in ancient Greece, they didn't have a word for blue, but people understood what blue was. Same with anti-fragile. We don't really have a word for that. And in fact, a lot of the other languages don't have a word for that either. And so anti-fragile is what Taleb calls it. And it's just a great way to put it, because it makes you think, okay, what is anti-fragile? What is the opposite of fragile? And it kind of helps you think back to what I said at the beginning there, that it's not strong because that's neutral, but it is something that would benefit from volatility. This book is a book of heuristics, and that's just kind of a fancy way of saying rules for life or ways of thinking. So they could be conscious or unconscious, spoken or unspoken, but we all live by them. And for instance, we teach them to our kids. We might say things like, well, we don't do that. Taleb calls these heuristics the unwritten rules of thumb that are so determining of survival. This is one of those books that caused me to look back over my life and see events in a new light. So some of these heuristics that he goes over, some of these rules for life, they actually help me to see things at the time that maybe seemed a little strange, or the idea wasn't fully developed, but this book helped me to develop those ideas better. And I'll get into some of those in the next few segments. But this is what I call an important book. And what I mean when I say important book is that a number of the other books that you read will reference this book. they will reference Antifragile. And it reminded me of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman in that sense, where even for this project, I've read a number of books that reference Thinking Fast and Slow, and then some that even take one or two ideas from that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and apply it to a given field. And they create their own book just from that. So an important book in that sense is more of the source of a lot of these ideas. And Taleb himself would tell you that the source for a lot of his ideas are from the ancients. So everything is, it keeps tying back to other places. But Taleb consolidated a lot of ideas and then came up with this anti-fragile concept and word, even though it's been discussed in different formats in the past. So that's the power of this book, and it's an important book. I mean, I'll get in segment 3, I will get into other books that I've read for this project that relate to Antifragile, and some that even pull main ideas from this book to write their book. So as for who should read it, I would come close to saying everyone, because it's an important book, but it is a hard book, and I found myself having to read some paragraphs 2 to 3 times. I took a lot of notes. I thought hard about some parts. It's one of those hard books, but it's very rewarding. And with it being an important book with a lot of these ideas that other people are pulling from, it'd be better to read this one than a lot of the other books out there. As for how long it took me, I spent 12 days reading it, and in those 12 days, it was 16 hours and 11 minutes of total reading time. It's a 426-page book without the appendix, so that equaled about 36 pages per day. For the rest of this episode, I'll have 3 more segments. The first segment will be 10 heuristics, 10 rules for life that were in this book that really stuck out to me, and some of them were very counterintuitive, but some great ideas there. Segment 3 will be connecting Antifragile to other books that I've read for this project. And then segment 4 is the one thing, my one key takeaway, the one thing I always hope to remember from Antifragile. If this is your first time listening to the Books of Titans podcast, welcome. I'm glad you're listening. I do not do advertisements. I don't like them myself when I'm listening to podcasts, so I avoid them. But I've just moved into a new house, and the room is such that it is smaller than where I just moved from, and I've had to sell my bookshelves because they just don't fit for this room. And so I'm looking at having to do some custom shelving. And this custom shelving will also incorporate a desk and an area where I will do these podcasts going forward. I'm attempting to raise some money to do this. And if you've ever wondered how you can support the podcast, well, here's your chance, because I need help building these shelves and paying for these shelves. So you can go to booksoftitans.com/support, and you'll be able to give any amount. At that link, I will keep everyone updated on the status of how much I've raised and how much I have left to go. And so if you've gotten any value out of these episodes, you can now return that value and help create a magical Books of Titans library and studio. Now into segment 2 and the 10 heuristics, the 10 rules of life that were in Antifragile. There were many more, but these are the 10 that stuck out to me the most. Some are intuitive, some are counterintuitive, which is the best kind, and some were just plain funny and witty. So the first one I'm going to ask in the form of a question. And the reason I'm putting this one first is this one rocked my world when I was in grad school. I had a teacher in grad school who asked a form of this question. And it's throughout Antifragile. What happens with Taleb a lot of the times is he'll put in these fictional characters in some of the chapters, and it's a way to compare and contrast two people and their ways of thinking. And Taleb is just funny when he does this. But one of the questions he asks in this book is, who is more fragile? And then he gives you a composite of 2 different people. One is the mid-level executive at a publicly traded company. The second person has a lawn mowing company. Who is more fragile? Taleb would say, and my business school teacher said, the person that is most fragile is the mid-level executive, because they have one source of income. And yeah, it may be a publicly traded company. Things may look good on paper. That company may be be looking like it's good. But if that person gets fired, that is their sole source of income. You compare that to the person who has the lawn maintenance company who services 30 customers. That person has 30 sources of income. And they're maybe not as much as the mid-level executive, but when you add all those together, that person could lose 5 clients. They could lose probably 10 clients and still be okay. That mid-level executive loses their one job and they're in trouble. So it's just an interesting way and a good way to think about career and what you pursue. And if everything is tied to just one source of income, that puts you in a very fragile state. Taleb also talks about debt, increasing fragility, whether that's at a personal level or a company level or a country level. Debt, when times get tough, increases your fragility. The way to get anti-fragile, one way to get anti-fragile is to have multiple sources of income and to have little to no debt. So that was number 1, who's more fragile. Number 2, if you want to accelerate someone's death, give them a personal doctor. That is the second rule for life. And that's obviously a funny one, but Taleb says this is probably the only way to kill somebody legally. And his point is that data increases intervention. There's this pressure to do something rather than nothing. And you see that in the medical field, but you also see that with politicians. Like you can't just run on a ticket as a politician saying, I think things are fairly decent and I'm just going to keep them rolling as is. I'm not going to rock a whole lot of boats. Well, you're probably not going to get elected. And so there is this pressure to do something. And so Taleb says the best way to accelerate someone's death is to give them a personal doctor, because that personal doctor will want to do things and to intervene, and that can hasten someone's death. We'll get into another somewhat related heuristics in just a little bit, but that one was rather funny. Number 3, this was my favorite, and this is a heuristic, a rule for life for making decisions. And so here's what Taleb says. He says, if you have more than one reason to do something, just don't do it. If you have more than one reason to do something, don't do it. He said, obvious decisions require no more than a single reason. If you're invoking more than one reason, you're trying to convince yourself to do something. And it's not as strong as just having that one simple, single reason to move forward. I thought that was just a brilliant way to consider decisions, consider things that you have in your life where questions of what to do. That's a great one. Another medical one here. So medical heuristic number 4, if the patient is close to death, all speculative treatment should be encouraged. If near healthy, then Mother Nature should be the doctor. Number 5, this is a drinking heuristic. Drink no liquid that is not at least 1,000 years old. And so Taleb, he says he just drinks wine, water, and coffee. They've been around at least 1,000 years. They've been tested, and they're going to be okay. So Taleb does not drink Coca-Cola or Blue Gatorade or Red Bull. He just drinks liquids that have been around for 1,000 years or more. I thought that was just kind of a funny, but probably a good heuristic as well. Number 6, for perishable items, every additional day of the life translates into shorter life expectancy. For non-perishables, every additional day of life translates into longer life expectancy. So if something can perish, if something can die, every additional day of life translates into a shorter life expectancy from that point forward. For non-perishable items, every additional day of life translates into longer life expectancy. This gets into the Lindy effect, if you're familiar with the Lindy effect from other books by Taleb. And that's basically, I believe Lindy was a restaurant near Broadway in New York. And this heuristic came out of that, where if there was a Broadway play that had been around for a year, it was questionable if it would be around for another year. However, if there was a Broadway play that had been around for 40 years, it was very likely that would be around for another 40 years. So it's this idea of the longer amount of time that something non-perishable has been there, perhaps like an idea or a book. If something has been around for a certain amount of time, it should be around for that much longer. So in this sense, if something, he takes it with books. So if a book has been around for 40 years, it should be around another 40. If it's been around for 2,000 years, it's going to be around for a lot longer. Number 7, the complex heuristics of tradition. That's a phrase he uses. And it was a neat way to think about traditions. So he said traditions are rules of life passed down through the ages. And if they have lasted this long and they've survived, it's an important rule. It's an important heuristic, and it's one that should not be removed. It made me think of Chesterton's fence. And Chesterton's fence is this idea that if you go up to a fence and you see it's there, your first inclination should not be to tear that fence down. Your first inclination should be, why did somebody put a fence here? There must have been a reason. And after you ask that question and think about it for a while, if there really is no reason or that fence shouldn't be there anymore, then take it down. But your first inclination should not be to come up to something and that somebody else has done in the past and to just remove it. Same idea here. If there's a tradition there, it has stood the test of time. Ask why that tradition is there. That's a good heuristic. That's a good rule for life. Number 8, the skin in the game heuristic. Taleb says, never listen to a leftist who does not give away his fortune or does not live the exact lifestyle he wants others to follow. In another heuristic that ties into that, a man is honorable in proportion to the personal risk he takes for his opinion. So again, never listen to a leftist who does not give away his fortune or does not live the exact lifestyle he wants others to follow. That is the skin in the game heuristic. Number 9, he talks about marketing versus recommendations, and this ties into skin in the game as well. Taleb says, there is no product that I particularly like that I've discovered through advertising and marketing. But he gets a lot of the ideas of products from friends, and so things that have been recommended. And with recommendations, there's a certain level of skin in the game. The person has purchased that product, they've used it, they've spent their money, their hard-earned money to get this product. If they recommend it, then, and a number of people have recommended it, there's a better chance than if a company is telling you you should purchase our product. Now, there's obviously a certain level with marketing where some of it's just, you got to get information across about the product, but there's also a certain level that a recommendation is going to trump marketing any day. And it brought to mind this Proverb 27:2, where it says, let another praise you and not your own lips. There's that idea tied in here as well of marketing, kind of the company touting itself versus a recommendation, someone who has skin in the game, who is talking about a product or a service. Number 10, add randomness to the system. So Taleb talks about the Athenian assemblies. Part of who was working in government would be chosen by lot. So it would just be an average person, and they were chosen by lot, and then they were to become part of the government for a set period of time. And what that would do is just spice things up a little bit. So you've got someone who's not a career politician, and they are called up, and they just they stir things up a little bit. And I thought that was a really neat thing and a neat idea, and one that perhaps could be even incorporated into companies. Maybe instead of just having this board that doesn't change much and is always there, maybe there's a rotating board member every 6 months or something, but it's somebody chosen by lot from the company. So it could be a low-level employee, it could be a mid-level employee, but that person is part of the board meetings or maybe even part of the executive meetings, and just to stir things up a little bit. So add randomness to the system. That's number 10 in the 10 rules that are in this book that really stuck out to me out of the many, many heuristics. Now into segment 3, just a discussion about some of the other books I've read for this project that tie into Antifragile. And the first would have to be Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Taleb and Kahneman are friends. Taleb calls him Danny. They're so tight, he doesn't even have to call him Daniel. He can call him Danny. And Thinking Fast and Slow is one of the most important books I've read for this project. I've read so many other books that pull just like one idea from Thinking Fast and Slow and then write a whole book on it. So if you read Thinking Fast and Slow, it's the source of a lot of other books that you read. So it's probably just better to read that book instead of all these other ones. But in Thinking Fast and Slow, I learned about heuristics, and they come up all the time. And I'm sure I had come across that word in other books, but I never really began thinking about it deeper until reading Thinking Fast and Slow. And so Antifragile has a lot about heuristics as well, but Thinking Fast and Slow is where I first came across them. And then in that book, there is a system 1 and system 2. And it basically like an unconscious versus an unconscious versus a conscious way of thinking. And there's a slow way and a fast way. And so these things are contrasted. And so it's a very important book to get a lot of these big ideas and to see how our minds and different things can trick us. So one idea from there is, if you have these two systems, if you have kind of an unconscious way of thinking, like these rules for life that you don't even think about, you just act accordingly, compared to a conscious, like I'm going to do things this way because of this. How do you change that? Like, what if you come across a new idea and your old way of thinking just it doesn't cut it anymore? So how do you get something out of your unconscious? That's what the book, The Art of Learning, which was on my 2017 reading list, that's what that gets into. That one's by Josh Waitzkin. And he talks about how to get heuristics from your conscious to your unconscious. So how can you get these rules for life so embedded in you that you're not even consciously thinking about them, but that's just how you do things from that point forward. Another book is Range by David Epstein. That was on my 2020 reading list, and I covered it in an earlier episode of the podcast. But Epstein talks about a wicked world, one where there's imperfect and incomplete knowledge. And in this wicked world, we just don't have enough data. So you're never going to have 100% certainty in any situation, whether that's a business problem, a personal struggle, or a life choice. So what is the best method for approaching these situations? And for Epstein, the question is, do you go full specialization, like go super strong into one niche, or do you have a broad range in your approach? And obviously from the title, Epstein suggests a broad range, but this ties in very closely to the idea of anti-fragility. If you are fragile, you kind of have that full specialization in one area of or niche, whereas anti-fragile, you have more of a range. Next book, Coddling of the American Mind. That was one of those important books, and that was on the list last year. There was a whole section about anti-fragility, and so they referenced this book, they referenced anti-fragility, and that's really the first time I came across the idea. But they talked about it in the sense of raising kids and the easy way to do a lot of harm by protecting kids too much. So you obviously need to protect children from major catastrophes. Don't let them play out in traffic to see how fragile they are with buses getting hit by buses. It's you protect from major catastrophes, but you've got to open up to where you don't treat them as completely fragile, because they're not fragile. They are anti-fragile. So they are going to get stronger through some things that are going to hurt. And so how do you create that atmosphere? And that's one thing that Coddling of the American Mind goes through. I mean, and then it goes into college campuses. Like, kids are not fragile. College students are not fragile. They're anti-fragile. So if you protect them against ideas, if you protect them against certain speakers who come and create safe spaces for them to not get their feelings hurt, then you're cocooning them from these ideas. You're treating them as fragile, and they're not fragile, and that's not going to end well. So it could be to a body level or a mind level, but you have to treat people as anti-fragile and not fragile. And so Coddling of the American Mind gets into that. Natural Born Heroes is another book that was on my 2017 reading list. That was by Christopher McDougall. And in Antifragile, Taleb talks about organized sports and gym machines versus, so those, he says, are fragile. Like a gym machine, if you're doing a treadmill, you're going the same way. You're just walking the same way the entire time, and you're not going side to side. There's not it's treating your body as fragile in a way, and it's not exposing it to stress that's necessary for growth. So Taleb contrasts those fragile things with the anti-fragile street fights. In a street fight, you're going to have to move side to side, block, kick, do all sorts of different things. It's not this confined environment. It's you have to be anti-fragile in a street fight. He goes on later, this is Taleb, he says, an environment with variability, hence randomness, does not expose us to chronic stress injury, unlike human-designed systems. If you walk on uneven, not man-made terrain, no two steps will ever be identical. Compare that to the randomness-free gym machine offering the exact opposite, forcing you into endless repetitions of the very same movement. Much of modern life is preventable chronic stress injury, end quote. Made me think of a story from Natural Born Heroes. Well, just first off, the book is about the island of Crete during World War II. And the Nazis had come in, but they were having a very hard time subduing the people of Crete. And so this book, Natural Born Heroes, gets into that. And why was that? And Christopher McDougall, the author, he basically says one of the reasons is because they were anti-fragile. They had this diet to where it could help them go through a whole night of running. They could climb up these mountains really fast. And they were anti-fragile. They were not fragile. And it was because they were in an environment of having to live like this and of climb these mountains and be able to run far on little food. And so that made them very anti-fragile. And it also makes me remember another story in that book where apparently Teddy Roosevelt would go out of the White House, pick an area far away, and just run towards that, no matter what was in front of him. And it's that idea. It's not, okay, I've got this path I'm going to run on in the morning and it's going to be a loop and it's concrete the whole way, but it's picking a place straight ahead and just, if there's a river, you run, hopefully it's a creek, you just run through it. If it's, if there's rocks, if there's a little hill, you just run over it. You don't go around it. And it's that idea. And that is going to lead to anti-fragility because you're working different muscles. You're not just running in a straight path. So Natural Born Heroes got into these ideas a lot with, I don't think ever using the term anti-fragile. The last book I want to highlight is Generations. Again, another one of those important books. And in that, in Anti-Fragile, the book, Taleb talks about the non-linearity of things. Like things don't just go in a straight line. There's movement. It could be convex or concave. Just things don't go in the straight line. And that's really the point of the book Generations. History does not move in a straight line. History is cyclical. And that's one of the key points. It's not, people were ignorant and stupid in the past, and now we're reaching this time period where we're just all so enlightened and woke and just brilliant. That's not how things go. It is, there are cycles. And this point is a big one in Anti-Fragile, the non-linearity of things. We can't just expect things to go a certain way. Things are going to be hard. It's this idea from Range. We live in a wicked world. Things are not going to go well at times. Are you going to be ready for those things? If your whole life is about being fragile, you're not going to be ready. If you are living in a way that you're becoming more and more anti-fragile, which is how we are humans, as humans, then you will be able to weather storms. I mean, just think to this year, 2020, and all the craziness. How have you done? Are you fragile to major shifts like this, or are you anti-fragile? This is a great book to think deeper about those questions. Now into segment 4, in the one thing, my one key takeaway from Anti-Fragile. And it's going to be reading related. This is a reading project, and so the thing that stuck out to me the most was about reading, and it was about Taleb's rules for reading. So again, back to those heuristics. But these are some that offer some great advice for which books to choose, and I know they were helpful to me. But first off, I just want to highlight that Taleb, on page 246, he says, at age 13, he started keeping a log of his reading hours. And he started reading 30 to 60 hours per week. Per week, 30 to 60 hours per week. I'm lucky to get, I mean, a really good week for me is 10 hours. It's probably around 5 to 10 hours per week. He was doing 30 to 60 hours per week as a 13-year-old. And he said he has kept this practice. So I don't know if he's still doing, up to 60, but he's still reading a lot, and he's still keeping log of how much he's reading. And the cool thing was, when he was 13, he was reading the classics. Like, he wasn't reading the new books. Like, he was going deep, and he was reading literature and philosophy, but going back 2,000 years. So really going into that Lindy effect of, if a book has been around for 2,000 years, it's going to be around for another 2,000 years. So let's start with those. So here are some of his rules for reading. So first off, in response to a question of how do we teach children skills for the 21st century, Taleb replied, make them read the classics. So that's the first one. The second one. So we can apply criteria of fragility and robustness to the handling of information. The fragile, in that context, is, like technology, what does not stand the test of time. The best filtering heuristic, therefore, consists in taking into account the age of books in scientific papers. Books that are 1 year old are usually not worth reading. A very low probability of having the qualities for surviving, no matter the hype and how earth-shattering they may seem to be. So I follow the Lindy effect as a guide in selecting what to read. Books that have been around for 10 years will be around for 10 more. Books that have been around for 2 millennia should be around for quite a bit of time, and so forth. End quote. I love that one. Books that are 1 year old that are usually not worth reading, no matter the hype and how earth-shattering they may seem to be. And that's one thing I've highlighted in other episodes. It's really hard to tell how good a book is when it's new, because I've read some that everyone says that book is great. The marketing around the book is fantastic. What I noticed a lot of times is whoever wrote the book is extremely wealthy. And there's a reason there is a lot of good news about the book out there. It was paid for. And so those are the types of things that are not going to really come about and be understood for a while. And so it's best to just not read a book right when it comes out. Despite everyone telling you, you've got to read this new book, you've got to read this new book, just give it a little time. It's a great heuristic. Here's one more that I want to highlight from Antifragile. One of my students, who was majoring in, of all subjects, economics, asked me for a rule on what to read, as little as feasible from the last 20 years, except history books that are not about the last 50 years. I blurted out, end quote. So that was a funny one. As little as feasible from the last 20 years, except history books that are not about the last 50 years. That's one thing that bugs me about news. When you're reading news, the journalist is forced to put their thoughts together of what all of this means. And it's really hard to do that the day the thing is happening. And so you need this distance of time to learn more about the events surrounding what's going on. And so it's hard I don't watch the news. That's one of the reasons. It's very hard for somebody to understand and then discuss what is actually happening. It's better to go back and read history of what is leading to the situation now, and some of that history from way in the past of how things are, their current state from what happened in the past. It's better to read that kind of thing than to try to figure out what's going on in the daily news. I want to read one other quote that ties in, and this one's from C.S. Lewis, and this is another heuristic for reading. And so here is his. It is a good rule after reading a new book never to allow yourself a new one till you have read an old one in between. So he would say read a new book, and then an old one, and then a new one, and then an old one. Back to the quote. If that is too much for you, you should at least read one old one to every 3 new ones. End quote. So that's C.S. Lewis's rule, ties in somewhat with Taleb's there. But the most important thing there is read old books. There's a reason they are still around. There's a reason they are still printed. The older, the better. Here's one other quote from Taleb in Antifragile. But there's something central in following one's own direction in the selection of readings. What I was given to study in school, I have forgotten. What I decided to read on my own, I still remember. End quote. Very key point. One idea that I've taken from Antifragile that I am really trying to implement next year is to add randomness. And I'm going to attempt to do that in my reading list. So I'm going to attempt to add randomness to the books that I choose for next year. And I will give more details in an upcoming episode, but at this point, I'm completely scrapping what I had planned to read for 2021, and I'm going to do something different. And this book has helped me to add that randomness, or to seek that. So I will give more details here soon, but I'm really excited about that. And so again, just another idea from this book that I'm going to implement here. So to recap, this is an important book. It's a challenging one. I will read this one again. You can skip other books and read this one. This one is where a lot of ideas come that other people take and write about it. Or on the flip side, you could read this book and then write your own book and tie the ideas into your specific area of expertise. It's just one of those kinds of books. It's one that'll make you think back over your life, and you'll recognize anti-fragility throughout. And maybe it's in the sense of you were protected too much, or you'll remember back to the times where you were challenged and how big of an impact that had on you. You might remember the teachers that challenged you and how that allowed you to become better. They treated you as anti-fragile compared to the teachers that perhaps just praised you all the time, or even treated you as fragile. You'll realize you grew the most through the pain, through the struggle. You will have some aha moments. Things will click that you won't be able to get back to how you used to view them before. Taleb's style is rough. He brazenly attacks people. It's funny, but you also, the whole time I'm thinking, man, this guy would hate me. But you will come away smarter from this book. You'll laugh when he pokes fun at those people. But most of all, it's a fun book, and have fun with it if you read it. It's a hard one. It's a challenging one, but it is really fun, and the ideas are important. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. That's Eric with a K. So ERIK at booksoftitans.com. You can also go to the website at booksoftitans.com/contact, and I have my physical address there, my P.O. box, so you can write me a letter, and I love getting those letters. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, and the website is stock full of resources to help you find good books and to create your own reading list. I'll be back next week discussing another book from my 2020 reading list. Remember, you can help build my new library. That's at booksoftitans.com/support. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.